Hello, everyone. Today we are joined by German political scientist and author Ulrike Guérot. We will be discussing her new book in which she talks about what has changed in Europe in general and in Germany in particular over the past few years. And also she talks about how West and East now can cooperate again in new terms. Welcome. Your new book published in German and its title is Change of Times. It begins with your personal experience as an extraordinary example of Germany's and Europe's transformation. After the start of the Ukrainian war, you were forced to resign from your position at the University of Bonn. Could you tell our audience, our viewers, how this process began and unfolded?
Yeah, many thanks for Harici and Erman for welcoming me here. I'm very happy. It's not the first time that I'm with Harici, and I'm happy to have these contexts. Indeed, yes, I'm a German professor. I was also teaching in other countries, Austria, before I came to University of Bonn. And I would basically do European integration studies. Yeah, I mean, the history of European integration, Jean Monnet chairs, all these sort of things. And I have a long experience. In the 90s, I worked for Jacques Delors, so I also know the European Union from the inside. Yeah, but then, I mean, the European Union took a very problematic stance over the years, and I became ever more critical, so to say. Banking crisis, all these governance structures. So it was evident that something needs to happen. But instead of reforming, the European Union always basically refused reforms. And then came the war in addition to it. Yeah, so I had a couple of books out claiming for institutional reform of the European Union. There's also the question of Turkish membership, you remember, I mean, and the association agreements with Turkey. And then came the war. And the war was, for me, the last sort of element that something needs to change fundamentally, that Europe is sucked into transatlantic separation, yeah, that this war is a proxy war. It was pretty evident since the Maidan that this was a US proxy war, a long strategic planning behind. I mean, my last book is about the heartland theory of Halford Mackinder, yeah, this sort of NATO enlargement reaching into Eurasia. And it was, for many observers, clear to see that the Ukrainian war is sort of the last element of this strategy. And I felt like this strategy is suicidal for Europe. It's totally suicidal in social terms, in societal terms, in economic terms, and obviously in strategic terms, because the history of especially my country, Willy Brandt, but also Olaf Palme, Bruno Kreisky, was we need peace with Russia and not against Russia. And when the war came down in '89, the promise was that now we do Europe whole and free, and we do a secure architecture with Russia. That was the Chart of Paris of '99. And in '91, '92, we had basically two European goals. One goal was that we do a political Europe called European Union, Maastricht Treaty. And the other was we do a peace architecture with Russia. And 30 years after, and that is basically my argument, all this is totally collapsing. Europe is not doing the political union. The citizens are betrayed. There's no transparency in the governance structure of the EU. So the EU is really under stress. And on the peace architecture, we try to do peace against Russia. And we try to unite Europe now in a war. For me, this is not only totally absurd, it's insane, because Europe was built on a peace history. For years, we told citizens Europe means no longer war. And now we try, look at the rearm sort of white book of Mrs. von der Leyen, to unite Europe against Russia. And you can already see that this is not functioning. I mean, not only because Orban is against and Fico, Slovakia, but also Romania, many other countries. I mean, we need to look at the Romanian elections, but you see also the southern countries like Greece or Italy or Spain, where you have large, populations who do not want this war. In essence, the war is a Baltic sort of thing. It's mostly the Baltic countries. And then we have Kaja Kallas, who is the High Representative for Foreign Policy, who is Estonian, and who has a huge institutional impact. And the thing is that my argument in the book is that if Europe now wants to do peace against Russia and not with Russia, it betrays its history, it will not succeed, it cannot do war, it will not win war, and it will be forever in a sort of transatlantic setting of a transatlantic pro-NATO elite, which is at the end of the day suicidal for Europe. And so my book is an offer to the BRICS world, Turkey, very happy to talk to you today, but also to Russia, to the Chinese, to the Arabic world, to say, if Europe wants to survive, Europe needs to turn east and Europe needs to turn south. So it needs to look at the BRICS dynamic and it needs to look at the Oriental Arabic dynamic. Yeah, so that's I try to develop, and I'm very thankful that you offer me here an occasion to talk about this book, because it's a reconciliation offer. I think really Europe must fundamentally turn.
Mm-hmm. Let's dig into your book in a deeply manner. When we look at the chapters in your book, it seems you are saying goodbye or farewell to nearly everything we associate with European values, you know, like democracy, human rights, political participation, and so on. While some argue that Europe never truly embraced these values, it is clear that a change is underway. How did this happen?
I mean, first, I must say, perhaps also for my biographical development, you know, I worked with Delors in the 90s, Jacques Delors, the former president of the Commission. I'm 60 years. I'm born in Germany, in Western Germany, in 64, when Turkey posed for the first time the accession for the European Union. So I'm born in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is by definition social, Christian, European, say liberal, yeah. And I saw in my biographical sort of course of life all the changes that Europe did. And they started with the European Constitution that failed in 2003. Then came the banking crisis, then came austerity, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So for me, since 20 years, I'm observing all the shifts, because, you know, I must admit that, say, before the Constitution, 2003, I thought we really could make it. We could do a rule of law, democratic, social, peaceful Europe. That was the dream. And by then we had books like the book of Jeremy Rifkin, Why the European Dream Will Eclipse the American Dream. I mean, remember the beginning of the century. Europe was there. The Americans go to war in Iraq and everybody looks at Europe. So, okay, now the US is out. Finito Pax Americana. Europe is the new sort of entity that does rule of law, that does social justice and the whole thing. Yeah. And it is, for me, as a European, not easy to analyze 20 years later that Europe did not hold promises. We didn't hold promises, yeah? Instead, we do European Digital Service Act. We are doing ever more surveillance and control. We have ever less transparency and participation of citizens in whatever European democracy which is inexistent. But the EU is also sort of getting congruent with NATO. So there is a rearmament in Europe. Now Europe wants to do war. I mean, Europe is in total betrayal of what it told it would be. And I observe that, for instance, I mean, there's a lot to say about Ukraine and the Minsk agreements and everything that failed. But to see that Europe is now talking about what we call now rule-based order, because we need to avoid to talk about the UN Charta, which is the common international law that globally unites us. Because Europe, the EU, many European countries are themselves in infringement with the UN Charta. Yeah, with respect to also the ICC, look at Netanyahu and all these regulations, and to see European countries and the EU circumventing international law, to not base themselves any longer on the UN Charta, but call it rule-based order, which is sort of an order that we invent as the right of the more powerful, you know, I mean, how do you want to explain it differently? This is, for me, it makes me shameful. I'm a European, and I thought that European countries stick to what they wanted to be, which is reasonable, humanitarian, you know, humanist ideology, yeah, humanist orders, UN-Charta, and so on and so forth. And I see Europe in derailment from all of this, and I'm concerned about what the European role in the world can or should be, and what we are delivering, and we are delivering anything of this. And it makes me shameful, and I think it makes many Europeans shameful, and that's why I wrote my book. The book, in a way, is a cry for help. Look at Europe, which is, you know, squeezed and like a citron, you know, on this NATO control, la la la. My argument is that we need to create a post-Atlantic Europe, and that post-Atlantic Europe needs to be anchored with the Orient in an Occident-Orient relationship, and it needs to be anchored with the BRICS community, so that we come out of our moral supremacy, the West, you know, the West, yeah, and the West is dead, and the West is failing, and I think Europe has a lot of work to do to go into self-reflection, who we are, what we promised, what we don't deliver, and how we can capture the moment. This is why the book is called Zeitenwende, how we can capture the moment of a totally changing world. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would like to ask a few intertwined questions after that. You argue that Europe has been a republic since Plato and ancient Greece. But today, in your view, Europe is on the side of the United States, on the side of Israel and Zionism, and on the side of capitalism, or the neoliberal form of capitalism. Do you think Europe cannot stand on its own feet again without breaking free from these three chains? And another question comes to mind. Is Europe as united as you portray it in your book? I mean, for example, how can the interests of like the Greek people and the German people be the same, in your opinion?
Okay, so perhaps I may hold the book for a second in the camera. So Zeitenwende, wind of change, times of change, you know, and it appeared yesterday in Germany, in German at least, yeah. And I actually do hope that I will get translations, because I want to steer this international dialogue, yeah. What Europe is, what could be its role in the world if the other countries, let's face it, are not too much pissed off Europe, yeah, because that's what I understand, yeah. I understand that many Russians or people from Iran or Turkey or Latin America, and I'm pretty well connected, and they look at Europe and they feel like, what are you doing? What are you doing, you know, with this war in Ukraine and so on and so forth. So I would love to have, in the moment of time we are all in, because we are experiencing, I think, a global change of the world and its architecture, that in this moment we could do a discussion. Is there still a place for Europe, and which one? Yeah. So, no, for the book. The book has three essentially chapters. The first chapter is about. It's important to say it's not a scientific book. It's an essay, and the essay tries to capture the moment, and it tries to capture three things for me that are fundamentally under pressure or fundamentally changing. The first is reason, and the first chapter is just some remarks of what I observe with what we are doing with digitalization, with the bureaucracy, how we we are no longer understanding the world because we are trying to learn everything cognitively. We don't touch any longer. We are losing our haptic skills. You know, there's a huge reflection about what the digitalization does with our mind and how we think, and also about mathematization of science, that we are thinking that the world is a model and everything is a simulation. You know, look on climate discussion, look on Corona discussions, everything can be modeled. And I just do a sort of critique of that modern understanding of epistemology, you know, how we understand the world. Yeah. So that is that. The second is a reflection on democracy. What Have we been told what democracy is and where democracy stands today? Are we still in the democracy, you know? And that is where I discuss that if you come from the ancient writings, especially the Greek writings, Plato and so, the jewelry in wording is the republic. If you go back to Cicero, to to all the history, history of thought, the word res publica and agora are the two Greek words. And if you read Aristotle, for instance, there is a clear distinction about what the republic is, which is participation of citizens, which is a town which is more or less self-determining. That is also equal rights for citizens. Yeah, that's a different thing. That democracy is, in a way, a formal thing. You vote every 5 years or 4 years, and then there's democracy. Yeah, so there is huge literature that republic is the normatively higher notion. Yeah, the normative order of public being is the republic. And you can say this from Aristotle to Jean Baudin, Les Six Livres de la République, to Kant, to Hannah Arendt, you know. So I wanted also to say, everybody talks about democracy today. Can we refine the republic? And can we understand the distinctively normative superiority of what the republic is? And then I operate in the second chapter with the notion of stasis. Stasis normally in Greek means if something is blocked. Sometimes it's translated with civil war. But basically, I say, at least in Germany, but I guess in other countries it's also, everybody wants to rescue democracy, That's the new wording now. We need to rescue democracy. Yeah? And I say, okay, let's look at what the republic is. But second, we are close to civil war because we have basically a confrontation between liberal societies and populist societies. And that is a sort of, clash of, I wouldn't say clash of civilization, the book is already written, yeah, but a clash of two parts of society, and this is cross-transatlantic. Today we say Europe is now alone, the US under Trump has been leaving Europe alone, and now Europe needs to rearm and all these things. And I say, no, it's not true. What is really true is what I call a transatlantic civil war. Most of modern countries are partly populist, so-called populist, and partly liberal wokist, let's say, yeah. And this is crossover, I mean, you see it everywhere. You see it in Turkey with Erdogan and putting Imamoglu into prison. But you see it in France, opposite side, that Macron has been putting Marine Le Pen more or less away from the elections, yeah. And the liberals in America wanted to sue Donald Trump. So I call it lawfare, that we do not do our political conflicts with elections any longer or politically any longer. We do lawfare. And the political opponent is basically put into prison or can no longer do elections. Yeah, like in France, we also would need to look at the Romanian elections, what really happened there in the December thing, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so we are doing lawfare because we can no longer do politics because there's this confrontation between liberalism and populism. Yeah, and then I articulate this in the frame, I call it transatlantic civil war in a way. And then there's the third chapter, and I guess the third chapter might be the most interesting for Turkish or Indish or Persian or Russian or audiences. And that's essentially, and you told it already, where I say Europe cannot go on as part of the West. For today, we understand that Europe, Western Europe, we always say we are part of the West. But I think we need to discover a distinctly different European civilization. And this civilization and also value, yeah, is not the West, it's not the US. We are not Starbucks. We have Segafredo coffee, and it's even better. We are not Hollywood. We have Chabrol and we have Pasolini, and there's a distinctively different movie culture. We have no neoliberalism in the, in the writings, in the ancient writings of European culture, because we are Republican. That's also a social component. Europe is much about revolutions. It's much about the poor, I mean, the Christian tradition, the socialist tradition, the working labor class tradition is very strong here. We don't have capital punishment because we are Christian, and so on and so forth. So I try to rediscover distinctively civilizatory elements of European culture. And I say these features are not compatible with the West. So Europe sort of needs to sneak out of the West, refine Europe, and then look what Europe is. And at that moment, I work, perhaps I can hold it here, I work with a European map, which is very dear to me, because this map is the oldest map of Europe, which has been found in 1500, made in 1534. So the map will be having 500 years and sometime soon. I think you cannot see it really, but this is Mrs. Europe. She's a woman. She's a princess, and this is Spain. And then this is the Italian arm going to the Orient. This is the British arm, and then it goes. And Istanbul. You see, this is her dress, and Istanbul and Moscow are in Europe. It's very important. Yeah. So, and then I just do a reflection, and I ask what this map, which is the first organic visualization of Europe, what does this map tell us today? And in essence, I say it tells us, because she holds the apple of Res Publica in her hand, So Europe is a republic, Res Publica, different normative order than capitalism. Yeah, the republic has a welfare order. It's not capitalist. You win and you make millions. Yeah, republic is something normatively different. So the Europe is a republic because she holds the Reichsapfel. Second, she, with her, the way she holds her head, she looks to the Orient, because we always have this Orient-Occident mirroring, Mare Nostrum. So Europe is nothing without the Orient. And third, she stands with her foots on Eurasian territory. Yeah. And I think if we translate this to what Europe should do today, it can only mean that Europe should reconnect with Russia and Eurasia, because she stands on that soil. It needs that she looks to the Arabic world, and that she understands that we are in a mirroring position. Also Albert Camus, L'étranger, all these, what is our relationship to Occident, Orient, since Homer, since Iliad, since 2000 years of War of Troya, And in that chapter, I say that it might be interesting to understand, because I know that there's obviously huge confrontation about migration and these Muslims coming to Europe and so on and so forth. And then that creates populism in European countries on the Christian side. And I offer as a dialogue, I offer the idea to look at the origins of jihadism that creates migration, and to look at the origins of populism. And then we could argue that the populism has a social argument, a capitalist sort of. The populism is the result of too much social deprivation in Europe. So you have populism, yeah. And jihadism comes from the democracy promotion of the US. So basically what I argue, what I offer as an argument is, both things come from the US in a way, the capitalism and the jihadism. Yeah,
you stole my question. Yeah, this is my next question, actually, because you emphasize the American hegemony in Europe and speak of a post-Atlantic era in your book, and you argue that the rise of populism and jihadism in Europe are the monstrosities created by the American neoliberal era and the American occupation or the democracy promotion in the greater Middle East. And also in relation with that, in this context, you also point out that the AfD phenomenon in Germany and in particular, and also the populist phenomena in Europe in general. So do you think that also the AfD phenomenon in Germany is a result of this process, the Americanization of Europe, and especially in Germany? And also it's interesting you pointing out that the so-called libertarian politics in United States and also in Europe, you claim that there has been no political tradition of libertarianism in Europe, but it seems that now AfD is trying to establish, especially the co-chair of AfD, Alice Weidel, because of her relations with Elon Musk and the other techno-oligarchs in the United States. And now AfD is some kind of carrier of the libertarian politics, smashing the so-called welfare state, if still have some shadows in the Europe. So do you think that AfD is now trying to establish some kind of new transatlanticism in Europe?
I mean, many thanks for putting my book into a DeepL, whatever translation, and reading it already. I'm very thankful for this, Erman. Yeah. And let me say the following. My beloved coffee around the corner, I'm sitting in Berlin. It's a Turkish person, Erdal, who runs it. Yeah. And he is a Turkish socialist and has all these Turkish socialists, I mean, what I capture is that there's a strong, and I captured it many times when I was in Turkey, yeah, that obviously Turkey has a labor tradition, a Kemal tradition, a socialist tradition. And it's very interesting to see that I can well connect with these people, and that there is a strong connection here in sort of theory of thought. It's important to me to say this, yeah, because then if we agree that you have in Turkey, you have such a tradition, and we in Europe, we have sort of the same tradition, then we could, and that is the idea or the argument of my book, we could agree on the fact that capitalism has destroyed the republic. Yeah, I mean, that is in essence what I'm arguing. Yeah, that the republic is not capitalism. And you are also Turkish Republic. Yeah, so basically capitalism destroys society. And in all aspects, it destroys them in the gender relations with all these discourses about wokeness and transgender and whatever. I mean, you know what I mean, yeah? But there's an atomization of citizens. Look at what happened in France. The Gilets jaunes were destroyed. So the social protest is more or less undoable today, yeah? And so the protest has been shifted from social protest to right-wingers, yeah? As the social protest was then tagged to be right-wing, and that is the essential shift, to not blame the origins of what has been destroying all our societies, the Arabic societies as much as the European, as much as the Turkish societies, yeah? In this world now, the populist goes against this because the left failed. I also have a long chapter in my book that the left went against this destruction of, societies through capitalism, but they failed, yeah? So make a lot of arguments. And then the protest came to the populists, but the populists don't do revolution. Populist resistance is, has a whatever, this is then reactionnaire, and so it can be blamed as reactionnaire. Yeah. So, and that's the problem. In Turkey, I'm not so much into Turkish politics, but in France or in the Netherlands or in Italy or in Spain and Germany, I can judge it. Yes. And it's always the same phenomena that the social protest that has been turned into, les extrêmes se touchent. The protest went from left to radical right, but it's not allowed on the right side of the political spectrum. And then you have the liberals shouting, oh, democracy is threatened by populism and by right-wing extremism and so on and so forth. That's what's happening, yeah? So, and that's what happens to the AfD. Your question was concerning the AfD. Obviously, the AfD has been blamed since years, right-wing extremist, anti-Semitic, whatever. And so you can clearly see that the spectrum, left-right political spectrum, has now been turned into a political spectrum up and down. Yeah, so there is the oligarchy that has been centered in itself into ruling positions, and the people is somewhere below. But the political cleavage is no longer right-wing, left-wing, because now the liberals say we need to defend democracy against those populists. Yeah, so the political discussion is totally broken. And now, indeed, I look into the AfD. Not only into the AfD, I also look into what happened to Marine Le Pen and Giorgia Meloni. My argument is that all these parties in the beginning started as people's parties, really defending social interests of the people, defending low energy prices, peace with Russia. I mean, good things. Yeah, these populist parties essentially defended good things. Yeah, but then you see, especially also in France, it started in France before it started with the AfD, that, and I argue, is it undermination? Is it torpedoing these parties? Yeah, because you can now see that the AfD is slowly shifting from a party that was in favor of understanding with Russia to a party that is 5% NATO goal. Yeah, that is shifting from a party that has very social instincts, shifting to a party that signs with oligarch. And indeed, the call, the YouTube clip Alice Weidel had with Elon Musk, where she said the AfD, we are not Hitler. Hitler was social. We are libertarian. Basically, that's what she said. Yeah. So in a way, you could argue that that's a betrayal of the people, of a party that wants to claim it stands for the people. Yeah. And I'm just trying to shed a light on it and say, what is happening there? What is happening that the parties who start off as a reaction to a social crisis, reaction to warfare, these parties which start with good goals, are sort of undermined and are shifting to a transatlanticist, pro-NATO, pro-Israel at any price sort of stance, where you can see that all these things are not doing good for Europe and good to the people. Yeah, Europe would be much better off if we would give a hand to the Russians and the sanctions, rebuild the pipeline Nord Stream 2, have a good relationship with the Orient, yeah, and cut us off the US sort of NATO and Silicon Valley bubble, because that's profoundly not our culture and profoundly not our economic tradition. But instead, we go into this direction. What I argue then in my book is, many people think that if populist parties are elected, then things would change. And that's my argument, that perhaps if they are now elected, Giorgia Meloni, Marine Le Pen can no longer present herself, but perhaps the AfD will be elected. We don't know. It should be forbidden. Some wants to forbid it, whatever. But my argument is, before they govern, they are eroded in their programmatic ideology and shifting away from people's interest. So the alternative is no longer an alternative. That's the point.
Yes, yeah, I see. In fact, you are calling for Europe to seize the moment of multipolarity in your book, I guess, because I think in your book you write that the Europe should not look to its west instead of its southeast. I mean, like Russia, like Turkey, like the Arabic world. And you have also a rule book, a short rule book at the end of your book, as a kind of, sarcastically written. So
ironically,
yeah. That's the correct word. So do you think it could be useful in this regard to size the multiple polarity moment and to establish a new cooperation between the East and so-called West, or Occident and Orient, and also maybe the Europe can lead a post-Atlantic world. Do you think all of this possible, even this oligarchical elites in Europe?
So yes, I mean, if you want so, I could say that this book is a cry for help of me as a person, but also of all the Europeans, and there are many, the critical Europeans in France, in the Netherlands, in Italy. These Europeans who are basically thinking that Europe is suicidal if it goes this, I mean, Trump wants to change, yeah. So I'm not confounding the Biden and the Trump administration. We need to see, yeah, what happens with the negotiations and so. But that it is suicidal for Europe not to do peace with Russia, to end up the sanction. We are in total infringement, you know, also when we want to put a whole hand on the Russian money. I mean, this is total infringement of global international law. Yeah. So this arrogant Europe, who's, you know, this sort of, we can grab the Russian money. I mean, it's absurd. Yeah. And so, yes, a cry for help, because I think we are many. I mean, I'm doing many, conferences. I'm talking nearly every evening to people. Yeah. So there is a people elite sort of difference. Most elites in Europe are transatlantic, pro-NATO, whatever. I mean, the whole thing, pro-Israel. I'm not anti-Israel to say this, you know. I'm just, if you want, so anti-Zionist, you know. And I'm not willing to look at what is happening at Gaza, to basically, I mean, also Israel needs to respect human rights law. Yeah, I mean, this sort of starving the Gaza people. I mean, you cannot allow everything to Israel. That is not allowed in legal terms. That's what, so I defend the position of Yanis Varoufakis and all those in Europe, in Vienna, in Paris, who say that what is happening in Gaza is not okay, and Europe should do everything to stop it. And we don't do, because at the opposite, our Chancellor Friedrich Merz is saying, if not, I mean, there is the question, if Netanyahu would come to Germany, will he be arrested? Yeah, I mean, all these things. So I think that Europe has a lot to change. Yeah, and so this book indeed is let's say it again, a cry for help, that Europe needs readjustment in its politics to look to the BRICS world, to clarify its relations with the Arabic world, to clarify its relations with Russia. And again, I'm saying that there are many citizens in Europe who think alike. For those, I wrote the book, but there are also many critical intellectuals. The problem is we are all framed in Europe as Putin puppets. We are framed as right-wing. We are framed as anti-Semitic. We are framed as right extremist. I mean, we are weirdly framed. And that comes to your first question about why I have been pushed out of university. I mean, that's essentially the reasons. Yeah. So because I became too critical on all these topics, and then they found some little mistakes in my book and they called it plagiancy. Yeah, it's totally absurd. So I was saying that, the critic, I mean, the citizens, I think, I mean, we have majority of citizens who are against the war in all European countries. Yeah, it's just the elites who want this war. First thing. The second is we have a critical mass of critical thinkers, yeah, in all European countries who do the critical journals and so. But obviously they are minoritized, and obviously they are framed. Everybody is framed right-wing, is framed Putin puppet, whatever. So if the book could be a starting point to engage in a global discussion with representatives of the BRICS community. I mean, we are doing the first path here. I'm so thankful to Harici, yeah. And then go beyond this, do it with Kazakhstan, with India, with China, with Iranians, and so on and so forth. I think if Europe could, because we need now to go into self-reflection, and if there is an outside world who would mirror to Europe, we are waiting for you. We are waiting for shaping a new world with you, which is post-Pax Americana, which is post-oligarchy, which is post-American dominance, and so on and so forth. And we are already standing there, yeah, because this BRICS world is already building up. I mean, you can see the summit of Kazan and so on and so forth. Because for Europe, the choice is, and I put this in the book, do we want to stay in that West, in that little tiny West, which is basically, you know, the US and perhaps Canada and perhaps New Zealand and then these tiny European countries? Or do we want to be a part, having a role as Europeans, shaping that multipolar world? Yeah. And I clearly hope for the latter. Perhaps I can hold a different card into the camera, because I argue with, you know, I don't know whether you can see it, yeah, but that's this map I have also in the book, where is this red circle. And the red circle is essentially, you know, Argentina and America and Canada. And that's why Trump said Greenland should belong to the US, you know, and then that bits of piece of Europe. And I do not see that Europe can have a comfortable place in this network. And I feel like we should, you know, like on high sea, when you have a tank and that tank goes against a rift and you need to turn it to change direction. For me, Europe is in that moment. And the more we could get an international discussion, whether Europe is still esteemed, you know, we did so much things wrong that I'm still wondering, is there any esteem for the European project in the world? Would be very interesting for me to know. But I would tell to the world, to those who are interested in this question, that there is a critical mass in Europe of people who want Europe to change. And that's people, and that's a critical sort of thinkers. And we need to get connected to get that dialogue, because that dialogue may impact on our elites, and that may make them change, that they withdraw from this, you know, NATO, whatever, rule-based order philosophy, which I think is detrimental to Europe.
Yeah, that's all, Ulrike. Thank you very much for joining us. As the Harici family, we wish your book every success.
Erman, thanks for having me.